Welcome back, Curious Hearts. I'm Vera. Together, in every episode, we get to explore what it is we really believe, how we practice, and we get to meet people who are on their own spiritual path. Together, we begin. Welcome back, y'all. Today's episode is a big one, and it's a tough one, and it's probably the reason why it's taken me a couple extra days to get it out to you. And that's because today's spiritual practice is courage. When I first sat down to engage with this project, when I felt called to write it all out, what are the core spiritual principles and spiritual practices that I think are essential, regardless of belief system, regardless of dogma, but what are the things that I see across the traditions that are distilled down into requirements for our spiritual life? Courage is not the first one I wrote down. Surprise. Seems really obvious to begin with things like patience and stillness and awareness, attention. But honestly, without courage, none of it happens. And so courage as a practice is as foundational, maybe more foundational, than a practice of stillness or a practice of listening. I think in order to understand why that is, I need to talk a little bit about what we're doing here in the first place. Why is it that we engage in a spiritual life? Why do we invest our valuable time and energy and resources and attention on any kind of spiritual stuff? Wouldn't it just be easier to, work an extra hour, make an extra dollar? What is it that calls us away from, maybe not away from material life, but what calls us to more than our material physical world? I think that the reason behind that might be a little bit different for everybody. Certainly there are people who grew up with that as a tradition, and more power to you. It's a different path of having to unwind. But for many of us, the reason that we come to spiritual life is because we tried our very best with the material world. We tried our best to be a good partner and a good friend. We tried our best to, go to school, go to work, to be responsible. We did all the things we were told, and something still felt like it was missing. And that thing that is missing is the thing that connects us to something bigger than we are. And in so doing, it also connects us to each other. And I think that there are a lot of different ways that we can get to that something more than us, something bigger, something beyond our imagination, beyond our understanding, something that has more power and knowledge than we ever could. And that striving to be in connection, to be in relationship with something bigger than us, provides us with a way of seeking ourselves, but also of seeking meaning and purpose in our lives. It gives us the electricity we plug into, like that otherwise we're just kind of like a cable kind of flowing in the wind. It gives us freedom from the mundane, from like the everyday boredom of like getting up and making breakfast and doing the dishes and commuting and walking the dog and, doing the dishes again and doing the laundry, and that day in and day out, that our spiritual lives provide not just an escape from that, but a depth and a meaning beyond all of that also includes it. Sort of a transcendence, right? An ability to be in the world and also be out of the world, right? To feel like there is something beyond what we know that beats our hearts and breathes our breath. And that the mystery of that, the wonder, the curiosity of that gives us a sense of meaning and a sense of transcending the everyday. And the longer you live on the planet, the longer I have lived on the planet, the more apparent it is that I need that in order to feel like a whole person. But the other thing that all of this does is it gives us a pathway for connection, a pathway to connect to ourselves and to each other, and again, to that something bigger than us. And that connection, I think, is something that it is innate to each of us. It is something that we are born with and that we can't escape. So why is courage so essential to do any of that, right? And that's the piece that we have to dive into. Courage is necessary because it's not clear what it is we're searching for. It is not apparent what meaning is. It's not obvious how we might transcend this everyday reality. And more than that, because it is beyond what we can imagine, because it's beyond what we've experienced so far, it's unknown. And humans suck at the unknown. We are terrible at uncertainty. Right? The monster under the bed is so fearful because we don't actually know what's underneath there. Once you turn the lights on and like open up the bed skirts, it's a little less scary. And that gets us to the other side of courage, which is the other side. It's the inside of courage, and that's fear. Because no matter what happens for you in your life, there will be a moment when you're afraid. And you might not identify it as fear. You might recognize it as anxiety. There might be some other sensations around that fear. You might find that you are avoidant of something. You might, we use words like self-sabotage. And when people talk about self-sabotage, I usually recognize that as fear in drag, right? Fear in a costume distracting you from what's there. In order to step forward and engage in the world in an authentic, honest, and heart-centered way, we must take risks. And those risks are inherently scary. And so in order to do that, we have to be courageous. That's it. That's the path. What are those fears about? For most of us, the fear is always about being cast out, being rejected or abandoned. Whether it's a fear of abandonment, whether it's a fear of rejection, a fear of failure. Many people feel that the fear of starting out for something, creating something, and it falling apart, and that fear of failure keeps them from beginning. Why does the failure matter? Because if we fail in public, people will see us, and then we'll be cast out. For some people, the fear is internal. It's a fear of not being able to be our fullest self. It's a fear of being targeted or victimized for who we truly are. And also, so there's part of it is like the fear of being cast out, but the other fears are about change, because change can feel dangerous to many of us, to most of us, actually, especially when we don't understand or know yet what's on the other side of that change. It's one thing to, in the current world, right, or in my life, there's a certain fear about, the change of growing up, right, of graduating from high school and going on to college or to, trade school or some other adult world, right? That like maybe you haven't directly experienced it, but you can see it in other people. You have some ideas about what it might look like. In our spiritual development and growth, in our spiritual lives, we often don't have that same sense of what is on the other side of all of this work. Maybe we have some hopes about what's on the other side, right? We sit down, we like commit to meditation, or we commit to going to yoga, we commit to a prayer or a journaling practice because we're hoping for a little more lightness, right? We want clarity about what's important to us. We want to feel grounded again. We want to maybe experience a moment of peace. And once you have engaged in the spiritual work enough, you might discover that you get all of those things. What a relief. Like suddenly you start to know yourself well enough to know what it is you really want. It means you're able to make decisions in a way that feels much more authentic, much more honest. You have a reliable pathway back to being at ease, to allowing yourself to exhale and for all of, your burdens, real and imaginary, to just fall from your shoulders for a few moments so that you can just experience what it's like to be. And those outcomes are pretty miraculous. And usually the outcome doesn't stop there. The changes don't stop just when we find some ease, or just when we can make solid, clear decisions, or just when we can like be our full authentic self. Once that spiritual unfolding has begun, it must continue in its own time, and it must continue to ripen. And my experience is that the longer you are at it, the less clear you are about where it's going. Maybe this episode is just really personal for me right now. Maybe I am touching into my own need to be courageous and to recognize my own fears of the unknown. But this is a thing that I am feeling really palpably right now, and a recognizing that the only thing that has ever really worked for me in my life so far is to find a way to connect deeply with something that's bigger than me, to commit profoundly to my practices, and to allow those practices and that commitment to unfold in my life in the way that it does, right? There's a huge amount of trust there. But I have also learned in the course of this practice that, my life changed. My professional life completely changed as a result of committing to this kind of spiritual unfolding. My personal life changed dramatically. The way I spend my time now is not at all the way I thought I would have spent my time now. My sense of myself is different. My identity has shifted. And so when the rubber meets the road, I really understand now in a visceral, experiential way, the more you do this work, the more you change. And half of the work is trusting that the change will be for the better, which is not my strong suit. But I know that so far I have yet to be disappointed. So far, when I've been able to surrender myself to that unfolding, my life has turned out better than I could have imagined in the first place. That doesn't mean I'm not afraid. I'm afraid of what I might need to let go of. I'm afraid of who I might need to become. There are ways that we must be courageous in tiny moments, and there are ways that we have to be courageous in tremendous, important moments. And every single act of courage is a spiritual act and a spiritual practice. And we choose to practice because being courageous, being able to stand steadfast in the face of fear, is a skill we want to develop. It's the same reason that we practice anything else. When we look at the word courage, um, the the Old English comes from the Latin, and cur, right, comes from Old French, which comes from Latin. It means heart, right? Sacre coeur means sacred heart. And agere is the Latin verb for to make, to create, to go, to make a path. And so courage is literally the act of moving from the heart, acting with the heart. And I think it's important that phrase sacré coeur has evolved too, that the sacred heart is this is not just moving from our emotional body, but instead it is moving from the core of our being and the place that we know what's right. We know what is in alignment for us. We know what we believe. We know who we want to be. And sometimes we don't even have words for any of that. It is just a feeling of fullness, of forcefulness that comes from deep inside us. From, the place we put our hand when we say, I am, or like that sense of feeling of like being, all of that exists, right? Like right here, literally, metaphorically, symbolically. So when we can move from the core of our being, that's courage. So after we've done all of these other practices of stillness and listening and directing our attention, one of the next things we must learn how to do is to move from that place, from the place that's deep inside us that has been hidden and distracted by all of this noise and these other shiny objects, and that we must like listen and hear that still small voice, and then we have to follow the direction. And whether that direction is about picking up the phone and calling a friend, or quitting your job without another job, almost always the volume of the fear, like the palpable, sensitive fear that happens, like it's, quitting my job should have been way scarier than picking up the phone to call a friend, and yet, um, it it's it's not in order of magnitudes different. So, what does practicing courage look like? I think all of the pieces we've done so far are important, and they're all gonna play a part in a moment. So we're gonna have just a little exercise, and you can do this in a sort of meditation, but you might also find that it's really useful to do it with an automatic writing practice, right? And this is just a tool that we use to connect to all of the parts of ourselves. And if you want the, A plus, PhD advanced version, do it writing with your non-dominant hand. So the first thing is to ground into yourself right now. To let yourself arrive in your body, in your being, in your breath, right now in this moment exactly as you are. To feel what it's like to have a body and to have a material world, the pressure of the earth on you and the temperature of the room, and maybe you hear sounds other than my voice. And then we begin to direct our attention to that space inside, to the cavern of the heart. Maybe feeling your own ribs and the spine and your chest. Feeling the space that expands on the inhale and releases on the exhale. Perhaps noticing there's a warmth there. Letting yourself just bask in the warmth for a moment. If it's useful for you to think about light, either a light without an obvious source or a candle flame, to allow yourself to draw inward into that truest part of yourself. Fear. And then we begin to use that listening skill as we listen inwardly. And the question is, what is it that you want in your life right now? What is it that you want in your relationships right now? What do you wish for your community and your city? What do you want for your people? What do you wish for the world in this moment? Feel the expansion and the radius and the fullness of that desire inside yourself, in that sakakur, in that sacred heart that you have. And then allow one of those desires to step forward. Something you want maybe for your own self or for someone in your family close to you. You may have already noticed that the mind is finding all of the barriers in the way of this thing that you want. Whether those are internal or external barriers doesn't matter, but just notice that that's happening. But feel inside that desire the tug, the restriction of the fear that comes with it, the vulnerability of wanting something, of really believing something could be true and could unfold. This is what courage feels like. This is what courage feels like. If you've been writing, feel free to press pause and finish whatever you are writing. If you'd like to take a moment to just reflect for yourself, take a couple notes or make yourself a voice note, I recommend it. Courage is not an absence of fear. Courage holds inside of it our deep desire, along with the fear that holds us back. Because with courage is just living, it's just action. But courageous action, courageous thought, courageous planning requires fear to be present and to stay present. And so this is why courage is an essential practice in our spiritual life. Because if what we are looking for truly is a sense of meaning and purpose, if what we are looking for is the freedom or the transcendence from a mundane existence, if what we are looking for is real and meaningful connection to ourselves and others, fear is the thing that stands in the way of all of those things. The end. People do not pursue their purpose in life because, number one, they don't know what it is. And they're afraid that if they find what it is, that then they'll have to do it, honestly. And then maybe they already know what it is, but they are afraid to pursue it because they might risk their material well-being. They might risk relationships. They might fail. And in that failure, they fail publicly and they're cast out, right? Whether these are conscious or even rational fears doesn't matter. The fear, the sensation of being afraid, of the riskiness of it, that is the clue that we are starting to step into something courageous. If what we are seeking is a freedom from the mundane, everyday boringness of our routines, if we want to be able to see some sparkle around the edges everywhere we go, if we want to have a deeper meaning or a richer relationship with the world and with ourselves, we have to be the risk is, number one, again, that we won't find it, that the world is actually just this mundane, flat experience, and there's nothing more than this. And that's heavy. The other thing that we fear when it comes to experiencing transcendence is that we'll blow up our whole life in order to stay there. And I have to be honest, that's not an unusual risk. That actually might happen. It happens for some people. Not for everyone, but for some people. For some people, there is a fear that once we have seen that transcendent, experienced, felt that transcendent reality, that we will no longer be able to tolerate the things that we had tolerated. And the things that we tolerate are things like our jobs, our families, relationships that are painful or abusive, relationships that are personal or professional with people who limit us. We are risking loss when we want to step into a transcendent life. And if that doesn't scare you, I'll be harsh here. You don't deserve it. Being unafraid of losing everything that we have already known is what gives this work its teeth. It's what gives this work its meaning and its shape. And it is, in many ways, by its very nature, the core of what makes it transcendent, is that it is something that we don't yet know. It is something beyond what we could imagine. And that uncertainty is so much of the thrill, so much of the, and I don't mean thrill like a joyride, right? And in the most simple and also heart-wrenching way. If what we want is a real and rich connection, especially with other people, there is a tremendous amount of fear behind that, inside of that, around it. The fear of rejection, the fear of not being liked, the fear of getting it wrong, of being embarrassed. Eventually, I think all of those fears lead back to that fear of being cast out, of being, of who you truly are, not being what other people want. And so as a result, most people don't go looking. And that's okay. I don't blame them. Truly, I don't. I think that if you can live in the mundane world and make yourself into a shape that fits what other people need you to be, and that you can do that without it being so painful, I'm a little jealous. Full stop. Like, honestly, if you can have casual relationships where you just kind of shoot the shit and everything's fine and you don't need to go much deeper. Um, there are days that I wish I were like you. And I maybe am deluded into thinking that most of us are actually deeply hungry for something more than that. That the majority of us know that there is that true who I am in here behind all of the shape shifting and the masks and the bravado and the costumes and the roles that we've had to put on to be successful in the world. And that when we shed and drop all of that, who we are behind, underneath, truly is so precious and tender and vulnerable. And we long for that part of us to be seen and known in the world. And there are few things that are more rewarding than a relationship, a friendship of any kind, romantic, familial, spiritual connections, where someone sees you just as you are and where you know you are welcome and wanted, that you will not be cast out because of who you really are. At its core, taking the stand of simply being your true self in the world is a radically courageous act. When someone says something you disagree with, yeah, and it might not even be. The world that we live in right now is incredibly contentious. The world we live in right now is scary on its face. Almost anywhere you live on the globe, to be honest, that if you are not afraid right now, I think you're not paying attention. Please, write to me from New Zealand and tell me I'm wrong. I am afraid of the world right now. I am afraid of the transformation that the world is going through right now. And I'm afraid of what the future might bring. And so acting with intention every day, waking up and making a difference, or doing work that I feel is making a difference, creating a podcast and putting it out into the world, or teaching a yoga class, or working with coaching clients, all of those are courageous acts in the very moment. Because I will tell you, I have an animal body in here, right? I have a limbic system that's going, the world is dangerous right now. Protect yourself. Hide. And this is the opposite of hiding. And it's probably why it took me so long to record this week's episode. It's important for me to never make absolute political statements in this podcast. And if you know me, you might know where my politics land in the outside world. But what I will tell you is true about me as a spiritual person, as a spiritual practitioner, is I believe in the sovereignty of every being. I believe in the holiness of existence. And I believe that change and growth is always possible. And that the thing that gets in most of our ways is, between our ears. Like, it's that we are often our greatest adversary. And I think most of us are really afraid. Full stop. That's the truth. That's where I'm sitting today. And so, wherever you stand in the world, whatever your opinions, I hope that you will cultivate a sense of the courage that is required to both stand for those opinions, to take action in the direction that you believe is right, and also the courage that is required to be wrong, to revise what you had thought until now. Because I think both of those are scary for different reasons. But they're scary. And I hope that you will always remember that courage is the act of feeling the fear and moving anyway from that deep, true part of you that knows who you are and what matters. I think if each of us simply cultivated curiosity and courage, we would all be about 90% of the way there. So that's my assignment. That is your assignment if you would like it. And my prayer is that your heart is as full and expansive as it has ever been, and that you find the small and giant ways that you need to move in courage today and tomorrow and every day after that. Thanks for tuning in, Curious Hearts. If this episode was useful, I hope you'll follow the show or leave a review or share it with somebody who you think needs it. And if you're craving support on your own spiritual path or seeking some meaningful work, you can find ways to work with me at veralester.com. Otherwise, until next time, please stay grounded in that curiosity that you've got and keep turning towards what matters. See y'all soon.